Oh shit.
The U.S. Commerce Department recently released its early estimate for U.S. GDP for the first quarter, and it's indicating that the economy grew at 6.4%. Is that an accurate number? If the U.S. can't reach herd immunity due to a large anti-vax segment of the population, are we looking at another big-time shutdown in the fall or winter? If so, how will that affect such an already shaky economy? Is the Biden administration going far enough in their recovery plan? With payroll gain numbers falling far short of the 1 million economists expected, some states are ending the federal $300 unemployment bonus to get people back to work. What does that say for an economy that pays such substandard wages at a point?
Oh
This is
shit.
from Economist Dr. Only provided 1.3 trillion into the U.S. economy, 175 billion from the Fed. A good part of all that did not get into the economy, but was hoarded by better off households and businesses and not spent or used to buy down their debt loads. Probably no more than 800 billion actually got into the economy. In short, the third quarter GDP growth of 7.4% was thus mostly due to the reopening and not the fiscal stimulus called the CARES Act. Politicians knew, by the way, that the CARES Act was not a stimulus measure. It was a mitigation bill, and they called it that. Mitigation means putting a floor under the economic collapse for 2 to 3 months. It doesn't mean a spending surge that would sustain economic recovery. Mitigation bills produce rebounds at best, not sustained recoveries. And that's what the CARES Act did. It bought some time over the summer as the economy partially reopened.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. We are on the Saturday crew today, but let me the homies. First off, we have my homie, my dog, coming all the way live from Miami, Florida, Mr. Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings. Peace and greetings.
How you feeling, man?
Feeling all right, brother.
And you know him as Marcus from the Left Flank Vets. It is Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
What's up? What's up? What's up? How we doing?
Good, good. And now we're oh, come on. Put it on vibrate. It's 2021.
I turned it off.
In 1993, you're allowed to have the ringer go off because it's like, oh shit,
This is new.
Phone. It's 2021. All right. And coming all the way live from Riverside, California, he is show economist, everybody's favorite Marxist, everybody's favorite defender of all things tanky. He is Dr. Asatar Bair.
Good morning. I like how you're setting up a low bar for me by saying everyone's favorite Marxist, like that's such a popular category in the United States, you know?
There's certain segments of the population where you are
Certain segments, yes.
a bit of a celebrity. There's definitely other segments where people try to send emails and get you fired.
That's true. Yes, I've seen that happen.
I'm loving your Twitter fights that you get into with some of these people that say, how can you be an economist when you have communist on your profile?
When really the question is, how can you deeply study economics, politics, and history and not be a communist, right? That's the question they should be asking.
Yeah. And they're not asking that question. Then they get mad at you. So if you guys aren't on Twitter, it is a very good time. He actually is a quote. I've never so many leftist, communist, Marxist dad jokes. to the point where people, I put a title up, and I'm really bad with titles. Titles actually is a very Pascal thing to do. Pascal is good with titles, and he's with quick blurbs. And I didn't have him this morning, and these people had these great punny titles. Is Dr. Bair bearish on the economy? Bullish or bearish? So,
Joanna has said Dr. Bair with the verbal judo. I don't talk about this that much, but I actually have studied judo, like the regular kind, not the verbal kind, for about the last 4 years.
So guys, I might be a little choppy, and I might even break out. I might even lose you guys. So, like usual, just keep going and don't try to call me because that'll just ruin everything.
Word.
So, Pascal, you got some questions?
Yeah, my first question for Dr. Bair is that what are his thoughts on this perception that Biden is the new, remake of FDR or Lyndon Johnson, and that his administration is trying to pivot from neoliberalism? This is the talking points that the liberal elite chattering class is trying to push out. And what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, it seems to be just based on a kind of, a sheen of, progressive sheen, right? I mean, that's the Democrats' MO, is to try to, create the appearance, I mean, it's performative wokeness. I mean, that's the brand of the Democrats, let's represent some minorities, as, in these high profile positions, and not actually change any underlying structures. I don't see neoliberalism being challenged really in the slightest here. I mean, I think it's kind of crazy for even make the argument. I mean, just because it's the evidence so thin, but it would be great. If Biden can be pushed left, I would be very surprised. But I mean, it would still be good in terms of it would probably improve people's lives. But I don't even see movement on healthcare, which was like the big crystallizing issue. We're not close to Medicare for all. Bernie has retreated to, listen, let's just lower the eligibility age for Medicare. You're not going to do Medicare for all. How about lowering the age to 55, 50, right? Something like this, because that would cover millions more people, right? And, again, that would reduce medical deaths. It would, et cetera. But I don't think we're close to that either. So even the diluted measures around healthcare are nowhere close to being realized. I mean, in my interpretation, maybe people know something that I don't.
Well, and I kind of wonder if looking at these just kind of broad brushstrokes descriptors is it just even like a pretty shallow way to look at it, presidential administrations, how governments actually operated back then versus now, the actual more left push that FDR solidly had in the federal legislature, kind of like driving some of these things that's almost non-existent with Biden, and the fact that like I think it's a very gimmicky thing, to do. Oh, look, big spending program, and now he's traveling across the country. Hey, FDR, internment camps. Hey, FDR. But yeah, it's kind of a way to just try and push a narrative that doesn't necessarily have to exist for media people to want to tell it.
I was wondering, actually, do you feel that the posturing of Biden as the quote unquote new FDR, which is a sham anyway, because number one, FDR wasn't even FDR without the radical left of the 30s pushing him to get those concessions, right? Do you think it's actually a realization that the quote unquote post-Sanders left is somewhat in retreat and defeated because there's so much talk about coalescing around the surprise about Biden's quote unquote progressive posturing? I mean, because no one is pushing him to the left. So can an argument be made that quote unquote that burgeoning left has been taken out?
I don't think it's been taken out. I just think it no longer coalesces around Bernie, because Bernie's been a pretty big disappointment in his willingness to carry water for the Biden administration. And so, Bernie was always the compromise, right? I mean, like Boots Riley put this well, I think, where he said, listen, Bernie's the furthest right I'm willing to go, and it's because it's Bernie. This is a person of unusual integrity, but he's burning his support right now, right? I mean, every time he defends the Biden administration, more people on the left just shake their head, and so that just means that he's no longer going to be a focal point. I mean, a presidential campaign is exciting because it represents the chance to see a big change in a hurry, right? But I think that is largely an illusion, right? I mean, the presidential election system, the structures of it make it extremely unlikely, right, to have a resurgent candidate. And Bernie's done as well as anyone has ever done, right? I mean, in terms of coming close. But you can't. I mean, there's great limits to the system, which we've seen now 2 cycles in a row, right? And so, maybe it never really made that much sense to coalesce around Bernie, but it seemed like he was really changing the culture, right? I mean, he was talking about ideas which had been utterly, kind of third rail ideas, right? Like before, and showing that they have incredibly widespread appeal. So I don't think that goes away, right? I mean, as long as people don't have healthcare, right? Millions of people don't have healthcare in the richest country in the world, that issue's not going anywhere, as long as cops continue to wholesale murder people, that issue's not going anywhere, right? I mean, so it's just a question of what does it coalesce around, and where. I don't have the answer to that at all. I mean, it coalesced around Black Lives Matter protests, millions of people hitting the streets, right, last year. Will something like that happen again? Will there be a resurgence of that? I mean, I don't know. This will be interesting to see.
Well, go ahead, Marcus.
Oh yeah, I kind of, yeah, and that's where I feel kind of weird too, because I'm not like a Bernie stan. I just happen to be wearing the shirt, and that the sign behind me is a critique in itself.
Right.
But yeah, I think I largely look back about I guess my idea of what Bernie could have done, and I actually this is kind of a weird thing of trying to look at the path of Bernie Sanders and trying to just understand who he is as a politician. This is the kind of thing that sucks, is him kind of going back, retreating legislatively and saying, hey, this is what we might be able to do. Let's lower the age. That's a very, that's what Bernie's done his entire career as a politician. It's just once he went into this political revolution role, it is a wholesale retreat from that to go back into just the political, I'm the most left senator that you're going to get in the United States Congress. And so I guess, that's where I think the left, or what, or the leftists that happen to, be in the United States, how do we understand movements and not necessarily have to coalesce around a single person, but just more of an understanding when that special person comes along, we got to lean in and be able to stay solidified as we come out of whatever that brought.
It's sort of like if someone's beating you with a belt, right? And then somebody comes along and says, hey, listen, I know you're going to keep beating them with a belt, but let's just remove the metal buckle part so that you're not beating them with that part. I mean, that's the mitigation strategy, and sadly, that has a lot of limits, I mean, does it do a little bit less damage? Sure. But if that's the extent of the left's ability, I mean, it's just totally inadequate.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcus. Follow up. And that's where I think the disappointment comes in, is because people coalesced around Bernie saying we need to change this whole thing, and then in real time we're now watching him go to, let's just take the buckle off.
Yeah.
Do you think, and my opinion is that part of this is about a crisis of legitimacy that the Democratic Party realizes in the wake of the rise of Trump and the specter of a reactionary nationalism in the United States, in that we have a generation, particularly under 40, that I think logically and correctly views the party as a more harsh and brutal administrator of the neoliberal turn in the post-civil rights era. NAFTA, GATT, financial deregulation, mass incarceration. These are all things that were much more brutally dispatched, particularly for Black and brown communities, by the Democrats than even Republicans. One of the reasons I think that this arena of progressivism is being pushed in the atmosphere to describe Biden is that the Democratic Party understands the generational crisis of legitimacy that the party has, and that their ability to simply coalesce around neoliberal identity politics into the 2024 election, giving an open door to turn to the reactionary right. Do you think that I might be off with that assessment, Dr. Bair, or what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's a good assessment. I think it strikes me that, you know, the thing that I was thinking while you were explaining that is that the Democrats seem to be more competent, right? Like they seem to be more competent administrators of the neoliberal order. And because they have that kind of, you know, that sheen of performative wokeness allows them, it gives them some credibility, right? Which they then use to impose things that the Republicans maybe wouldn't, right? But the Republicans, I mean, their role, like in this show, is, you know, it's a good cop, bad cop routine, right? But they're both cops. I mean, come on, right? I mean, they both have the same aim in mind. So, you know, the Republicans have embraced that, right, and have become, their rhetoric and their posturing has become more and more unhinged, right? And that has some appeal to some people, right? I mean, that's the kind of fascist right populism, you know, with its appeals to traditional masculinity and, you know, anti-wokeness and all of this stuff. And, oh, you should be allowed to say racist things whenever you want with no consequence. I mean, you know, that appeals to some people, right? Reactionaries. And then for others, it functions to funnel people toward the Democrats. So, you know, I mean, the good cop, bad cop routine is used for a reason because it's effective.
I wanted to say we have a Kenzo Shibata. Shout out to Kenzo is checking out the show, and I need to message you, brother, about doing that thing we were talking about online. He says the Bernie coalition was defanged by the Dem Party, and it will happen again. We need to take that energy to get people better organized, so maybe we can have a left. And Kenzo actually is a union organizer. He's a teacher like yourself, Dr. Bair. And he says, hot take, funneling all of our energy into the PRO Act isn't organizing workers. What do you guys have to say about that?
I mean, I don't know if I can jump in because I know Kenzo and I love this dude and everything that he is doing. And I think for me, my perspective is that if one of the other things that he had mentioned is that like there needs to be, you know, education involved in your just day-to-day lives. And so that needs to lead to organizing. That leads to unionizing the workplace, unionizing your living spaces. But at the end of the day, yeah, there needs to be an actual coalescing, a building of a left movement that is separate from electoral politics, but is educated and is able to use electoral politics as a tool that it can be. And that's what's, you know, there's a whole lot of steps in between then and now, or now and something like that. But yeah, you know, I think it's faulty to rest all the laurels on one person in general. And if that person's going to be a politician, just don't do it. Just don't even do it. That person's going to fail you. They have to be coalition people once they get in. And who are they going to be building coalitions with? Our enemies.
What say you, Dr. Bair?
Yeah, I agree. Good analysis. You know,
I'm done. I'm out. I'm done.
All right, just spike the microphone. What's going on, Pascal? What would you like to add to that?
I think that's a very spot-on analysis, and I appreciate Kenzo for saying that. And I think a lot of people who came out of the Bernie Sanders phenomenon are realizing the limitations of the entry of the Democratic Party. And I think it's causing a lot of frustration. And I think there's a lot of political energy that is being, without understanding that perhaps that strategy was not the best of ways to deal with the problem.
Mm.
Joanna says mobilizing for the PRO Act is a good test for an incipient left to work on something that is not a political campaign for a specific candidate. Yeah, I agree.
See, this is where I think, mobilizing for the PRO Act can take 15 minutes out of your day for you to like make a legitimate difference. And this is something where I used to be a staffer.
Like phone calls, things like that. Okay.
You can just 5 minutes, call your reps, let them know this is how you feel. If you and talk to other people, get your phone calls. When offices get 10 to 15 phone calls, they're assuming, okay, this is about 1,000, 1,500 people that actually give a shit about whatever these people are actually picking up the phone about. So this is where I say electoral politics doesn't have to be I'm phone baking for Bernie 4 hours every day. No, you understand, hey, this issue's coming up. Will this benefit the left if the PRO Act get passed? Yes. Okay. Can I make a phone call about it? Can I send an email about it? Sure. And then you move on. Do my comrades know about this? Is that a 10, 15-minute conversation to get this thing? This doesn't have to be a difficult thing.
That brings up a bigger conversation. A good friend of mine who lives in Pascal's state of Florida, a little further north. We used to work together in North Dakota. Called me up just to tell me he's been watching the show and he kind of digs it. And we got to talking about unions. And we both worked in North Dakota. And I don't know if people know anything about the oil fields of Dakotas, but most of that shit isn't union labor. Most of that shit is non-union. In the Dakotas, it was a little.
Uh-oh.
Chopped up a little. He froze.
Well, yeah. So unions are good. Not where he was going with that. But I know, yeah.
You're freezing up.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, anyway, let's pivot to actually some actual real questions rooted in political economy. Unemployment numbers came out, and they were pretty disappointing in terms of the number of folks who are returning to the workforce. There are some on the right who are blaming the unemployment surpluses that was approved by the Biden administration for the short supply of laborers. Certain states, I believe South Carolina is one, and maybe Montana or Missouri, I'm the other, are literally passing legislation to cut the capacity of workers in those states to unemployment checks, try to stimulate labor. From an economic analysis, Dr. Bair, how do you see the job front, and how do you see these particular posturings from the right in terms of criticizing the unemployment stimulus as a means to gutting the capacity to find labor?
Yeah, that's a good question. The right has always had a certain epistemology around this, right? Which is basically like people are lazy and they don't want to work and they have to be forced to work, basically, right? And, capitalism's liberal idea is that it's wrong to force somebody to work with guns, but it's right to force somebody to work with poverty, with the threat of utter deprivation. And if you take away that threat of deprivation, then, it doesn't function as well to force people to work. And I think that is actually an amazing argument to make, right? Because it's saying we need a system that is structurally brutal and unbelievably cruel, right? Because, there's always going to be people that fall through the cracks. We know this. I mean, millions of people starve to death each year globally, right? Or even in the richest countries in the world. I mean, even in the United States, right? We have an official 500,000 people homeless. We have 10 million people that are at risk of eviction right now, right? I mean, so it's just amazing to me that in the midst of this pandemic and economic crisis, which is the only fair thing to call this, right? That Republicans, reactionaries are like, no, this is the time to really crank up that structural cruelty. That's just amazing to me that they're willing to openly say that, and that nobody ever just follows the logic there. To say like, oh, you're going to criticize socialism for forcing people to work, and then say people need to be forced to work. I mean, it's crazy to me. And also, I think it's kind of an empirical question, to be honest. Like, if we wanted to know why do people work, that's an empirical question. That's not really a question that you go to through crude appeals to, I don't know what, some faith-based idea about human nature. And I'm not sure if I'm directly answering the question. Remind me of the question again. All right.
I mean, the large question I want to ask is that, these capitalist employers talking about, the free market and the logic of supply and demand, if they're paying starvation wages in an era when going to work literally could mean risking your life, why are they surprised people are not coming into work? And why aren't they talking about raising wages? Since the logic of capitalism would tell you lack of labor supply means increase, actual enticement to work, which is increasing labor price. But they won't. Instead, they will say that workers are too lazy to come in and risk their life to work at McDonald's and get COVID at $7 an hour. So even in their own reticence to raise labor wages demonstrates their inconsistent adherence to their own ideology.
Yeah. Before you even answer that, just to keep something in mind, there was a McDonald's actually near me in Oakland where I believe 10 employees got COVID from one person that came in sick because they couldn't take time off work, and the entire McDonald's had to shut down. And I think there's a bigger McDonald's strike going on right now, but we've been seeing these kind of small labor strikes, and even a guy like Chris Smalls with Amazon, he doesn't start that movement out of some sort, like he watched Norma was it Norma J? What was it? Norma Jean? What was that movie called with Sally Field? Norma Ray? Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
The Union movie. He didn't watch that one day and get inspired. It was because of the conditions were so bad in that warehouse that people got sick. And I think he said like 6 or 7 people died in his facility. And that's what pushed him and radicalized him to actually think to unionize his facility. So I think
we need to look pretty hard at what have been the class-based effects of the pandemic, honestly, right? I mean, because there are households who have come out ahead. Okay, I'm going to say something which is going to probably get me canceled. Our household came out ahead as a result of the pandemic. I'm lucky enough to be in a field where I didn't have any break in employment, and we got 2 stimulus checks, and we're spending a lot less money, right? Because everything's shut down. So, among the top segment of the income distribution, let's say the top 20% or something. I mean, it's not that simple because, really it depends on what's happening with your job, right? But we know that it's far more likely among the, high income professional class, let's say, right? Many people did not experience a gap in employment. So if you didn't, then you're likely to be in a situation that we were in, that coming out ahead. I feel terrible about it. I feel like a survival guilt, because there's so many people who are struggling, and tens of millions of jobs have just been eliminated, right? So I think that when we look at the pundit class and who's analyzing the economy, this tends to be more people who have not personally seen big disruptions in their income, right?
Are you trying to tell me Joseph Stiglitz doesn't have any issues with his income?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. I mean, the people who do are the ones who are at the lower part of the income distribution, which everyone knows this, right? I mean, this is like the thing that is not talked about enough, but I think everybody pretty much knows. So that is an important thing, right? Relief. If we're talking about stimulus and really it's stabilization as a matter of macroeconomic policy, we should be gearing that towards those who are the worst off, of course, right? the way that we've done that thus far is through unemployment compensation, which is a traditional Keynesian idea, right? That says, hey, people lose their jobs in a capitalist recession, whatever the cause. It doesn't have to be caused by a pandemic. So we should help them out, right? Stabilize their income so that we don't have a much worse recession for everybody, right? And that's the traditional Keynesian playbook that the government followed. But reactionary is always kind of anti-Keynesian, right? And always like, well, should we really be doing that, right? We're getting rid of the incentive for people to work, on very little evidence, in my view.
Do you think that the allegation that the recovery is soon on the horizon is misplaced, or do you think that Biden is, his policy do the trick in terms of pulling us out of the COVID recession/depression?
I think we've had a very unusual thing that happened economically, which is that the U.S. economy was already entering a recession before COVID hit. And then COVID hit and everything got just apocalyptically worse, right? Because of, the shutdown of the economy. And so I think there's a kind of confusion. There's an analytical confusion where we're like, what the hell is happening? Is it, given the circumstances, is it reasonable to think that the recession would be so brief, given that, we had something which turbocharged it and made it much worse? For example, in the 1930s, right, the Great Depression, you had very strong rebounds during this period, right? You had strongly, you had huge contractions, and then you had strong rebounds. And what did people think during these rebounds? I mean, this is a different era where it was before official GDP statistics. They didn't have that kind of linkage between like statistics coming out and then news analysis of that we have today, right? But when rebounds happen, to the extent that people are aware of them, they probably thought, well, this is over, right? And then the Great Depression worsened again, right? Took a turn for the worse. So I don't think it's realistic to say that we're instantly out of the woods, but it's also, I just want to say it's hard to make that argument just on the basis of the macro GDP statistics, because the GDP statistics are something that is really kind of designed for the rich, honestly, right? I mean, who can afford to look at the economy from a 30,000 feet kind of perspective, right? Like a flyover of that's what GDP statistics are, Who can afford to look at it that way? The rich can, I mean, if you're unemployed or you're employed but you're struggling, how much do GDP statistics matter to your life, right? I mean, very little, I mean, so the majority of the populace in the United States, right, living paycheck to paycheck and so on, GDP statistics meaningless. But when we drill down into the numbers and we look at what is the actual dollar amount of the increase, now this is a figure that's in 2012 dollars, which is what they in order to do real GDP growth, right, where they pick a year and then they chain all of the numbers to that year, right? So in 2012 dollars, the dollar amount of the increase from Q4 2020 to Q1 2021, those are the numbers that just came out, is $293 billion. Okay. Now, this is on a GDP of $20 trillion, right? So that's a pretty small number. Are you guys with me on this, right? I mean, to say that it's 6.4%, okay, that's the annualized figure, right? It's really like 1.6%, right around that area, right? It's and 293, and this is after $1 trillion stimulus, right? So, how much of that increase is real, right? And how much of it is just, well, we did some debt spending, right? And we didn't even get a full $1 trillion out of the $1 trillion that entered the economy. That's actually pretty bad when you think about it, right? So, I mean, these numbers are largely about context, right? And I think, they're the propaganda function of them, right? To have news hit, to have the news media repeat this 6.4% figure, which sounds high to us, right? Because we're used to seeing numbers, 3%, 4%, maybe 5%. Okay, we see 6% number, and everyone goes, "Oh, right, that's fantastic," right? It's a very limited success, right? I mean, it's better to see some kind of expansion than a contraction. But my basic point is, A, for the average person, it doesn't much matter, and B, even for the rich, it's a pretty weak expansion.
Well,
I
and then
wanted to, before you jump in, Marcus, I wanted to go ahead to Dr. Bair's point. This is from Dr. Jack Rasmus's piece in Counterpunch early this morning. The first thing for readers to understand is the 6.6 see, I couldn't say that when I was recording that clip. The 6.4%, 0.4% for the first 2021. The U.S. is one of the few countries that reports its GDP figures in an annual rate percentage. Most other advanced economies do not. Annual rate reporting takes the actual growth for the period and then multiplies it by 4. In other words, a 6.4% annual rate GDP means if the economy continues to grow as it did in the first quarter of 2021, then it will amount to 6.4% for the next 12 months. That means the actual GDP growth for the first quarter is about 1/4 of 6.4%. That actual growth was 1.6% over the previous fourth quarter of 2020. Does that sound about right to you, Dr. Bair?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to looking at just the total, right? Like we're encouraged to look at GDP growth or whatever. Just look at the growth, and when we see this kind of line that does this, right? I mean, to the extent that anybody looks at the numbers, I think it's actually a lot more revealing to look at the total dollar amount, just to see what happened, right? And especially given how much stimulus occurred. Now, in that same article, Dr. Rasmus, whose work I like, by the way, said that the stimulus is probably too low. They could have done a lot more, et cetera, et cetera. Agreed, absolutely. But still, they're still injecting $1 trillion of borrowed money into the economy. That has to have some kind of effect. If it has an effect that's a lot weaker than that, why, right? I mean, traditional Keynesian economics tells us that there's a multiplier, right? A spending multiplier. So you give a person $100, the aggregate effect on the economy is going to be more than $100, right? Because that person spends that $100, it's income to somebody else who then spends a portion of it, et cetera, right? Anybody who's taken an intro macro course, right, is familiar with the concept of the Keynesian spending multiplier. So, and this is a point of argument in economic theory, right? The neoclassical or neoliberal position is that there is no spending multiplier, right? So that $100 of additional spending is just $100 of additional spending, period, right? So that's a point of contention within the theory. But when we see something like this, right, where a massive stimulus results in a very small bump in total spending or a very small bump in GDP, that's not a good sign, right? That's a sign that there's still pretty strong contractionary pressure in the economy, which, the stimulus is kind of barely offsetting, right? And I think that's our position.
I wanted to, like, if you even drill down as to like where that $1 trillion went, especially to like even going back to like the PPP loans, for example, where where like basic, like you said, you take an Econ 101, 102, you understand that, oh, hey, like the Keynesian model, you give money to people, they spend it, but like a lot of the stimulus package, it didn't go to people, it just went almost directly to institutions, and then from institutions into personal bank accounts that were already, quite large to begin with. And so, yeah, I guess I wonder, would you consider like that being a portion of the issue, is that like a lot of this money didn't actually go down to, the base, in which case the Keynesian model would come into play, where, a lot of it's still just dealing with corporate fraud.
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue. I think if you ask a kind of a liberal Keynesian, right, would it be better to, if you're going to do a stimulus or send out a check or do a tax cut or whatever, would it be better, would have a stronger effect if you gave it to the rich or the poor? I think they'd unequivocally say it'd be better if you gave it to the poor, right? The poor have a higher marginal propensity to consume, right? I mean, the rich are in a position to save that. And, Keynes is like, well, we have a paradox of thrift operating during a recession, right? That, normally thrift is good, saving is good. But when we're in a situation where we're well below full employment, it becomes bad. We need some more spending. So if you give it to people who are going to save it, then you're wasting it basically, right? I mean, like there's a certain amount of stimulus that we have. How do we use it the most effectively, right? And somebody's asked me if this is going to be on the test. Yes, of course it's going to be on the test. You're responsible for all this material.
Dr. Bair, I wanted to ask you a question on kind of in Marxist economic orthodox concept that I've been kind of questioning. The notion that the rate of profit falls on over time. If we assume that that is correct, then how do we explain the fact that stock and securities profitability have been on the rise, and we have such a huge amount of financial inequality? If the rate of profit were actually decreasing over time, wouldn't things like the degree of economic inequality we have in the country and the fact that the Dow hit 20,000 and the new means of financialization that are demonstrating profitability not actually be occurring? How do we rationalize those demonstrable signs of profit with the theory that profitability goes down over time?
I mean, those countervailing tendencies have been part of the theory from the beginning. Marx outlines the argument, and this is in a part that he never really finished, right? So he had greater plans for this, right? But he says, look, here's the tendency, right? As capitalism improves productivity, capital becomes a larger and larger share of the expense, right, of manufacturing. And labor becomes a smaller share, right? And since exploitation of labor is where profits come from, then the profit rate falls. But there's all these countervailing tendencies, right? So imperialism is one of, and this is only sketched out in Capital, but Marx has since then have really developed it, right? And so they said, look, imperialism is one of these things, right? Monopolization is one of these things which acts as a countervailing tendency toward the profit rate falling. And I think that is actually quite accurate, right? When we look at the 150 years since that was written, has there been a lot of imperialism? Absolutely, right? I mean, that's and to secure resources, right? Because capitalism tends to monopolize, right, within a country, and then needs to secure those resources elsewhere, right, against other monopoly powers from other countries, right? And so a competitive struggle between countries ensues. But another big way is financialization, right, which Marx calls sometimes fictitious capital. Right. He says, capitalism moves into these sort of swindles as a way of avoiding the falling profit rate in manufacturing. We can see that in, for example, the big car companies, right? Like General Motors created a financial branch just around lending people money initially to buy cars, right? But what happened is their financial branch became much more profitable than their like car manufacturing branch, right? Because, I mean, you look at the rate of interest, let's say, on consumer debt, it's high, right? I mean, we're talking 29%, right? That's a pretty high rate of return, even when you calculate that there's going to be defaults and stuff, which are going to lower it. So I think the idea that capitalism shifts to financialization in the more advanced countries has always been part of that tradition. And I think it's a pretty solid answer to the claim that says, well, what about when the profit rate doesn't fall, right? Well, I think what we tend to see is this is the reason why it doesn't fall, right? It's either because of a monopolization, imperialism, or financialization, or some combination.
Well, there's something that you kind of hit on, and I don't know. This is my favorite economic book, "War is a Racket" by General Smedley Butler. But no, like that's something with the United States having the largest military in the history of the world and the hugely profitable defense industry that comes along with it, the monopolization of it, where these tech industries end up getting swallowed up, aerospace, small startups will get swallowed up, and taking up like a large sector of the United States manufacturing base. Yeah, war is a racket, and it actually controls and helps capital to control and to keep, this thing going. And this is kind of this wild thing where Joe Biden in one sentence says we're going to end our longest wars, and then in the next sentence says we are going to increase the war budget to $753 billion, roughly 38% of that going to defense contractors almost directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you can't do imperialism as successfully if you don't have a military to actually, you're going to have to conquer. I mean, this is what this is based on. You're going to have to overturn regimes. And the United States, of course, has shown unbelievable willingness, eagerness to do that, just those things, right, over the last, 80 years or so.
Dr. Bair, I wanted to ask, we have a question from a friend of show and actually former guest that we're trying to get back on, Dr. Marlon Barber at the University of, or Missouri State University. He says, how does the shift towards cryptocurrency fit in with this? Is it possible for those more marginalized groups to get in on the ground floor of this? And I know Pascal has, I wouldn't say went down a crypto rabbit hole, but actually has some questions about cryptocurrency as well.
Well, that's a fascinating question. I haven't thought much about it. I'll admit that right at the outset. How might that help marginal groups? Cryptocurrency to me is important because every transaction that occurs on the internet involves encryption, right? So we are already doing cryptocurrency with every internet transaction, right? But the question is, who controls that process, right? And we basically know the answer to that with most transactions, right? With most credit transactions, who controls it? Well, the credit card processors, right, and the big credit card companies basically control this. And they offer us some services as a result of that, right? Like, if you don't receive the product, it's revocable, right? Almost everything, almost every transaction is revocable. So crypto, like when we say cryptocurrency, we mean a subset, right, where the encryption takes place outside of that process, right? Outside of this very small monopoly of credit card processors, who, by the way, also charge these exorbitant fees for their services, right? And thereby kind of taxing, all people who take credit cards, right? So, and these rates are high. So, crypto is a kind of economic reality, right? The question is, how do we handle it, right? And, crypto enthusiasts have generally made some like pretty bold claims for what might happen if we go outside the traditional, like, monopolized banking system. I tend to be skeptical of like super big claims. But, I'm also like, well, it's not like the current system is great, right? I mean, the current system represents a siphoning of wealth from every business that takes credit cards into the hands of a few huge financial firms, That is probably the worst way of setting this up, right? So, like, would an alternative be better? Yeah, probably would be, right? And in terms of how might, marginalized groups, benefit, I don't know exactly. I mean, that's a fascinating question. And, I don't know if I'm the best person to comment on that.
Doesn't cryptocurrency have the potential to create a speculative bubble that really is going to appeal more to people who are who don't have the experience and expertise in the traditional market? Because it seems to be appealing to large number of more proletarianized, working class, large numbers of people of color disproportionately invest in it. I see it as something that may lead to a bubble scenario in which those people who are not as securitized in terms of protecting their long-term positionality in the market may get harmed because it doesn't really have a demonstration to be a real tangible asset. You can't convert it into like a physical shop or products or tools or manufacturing something.
Well, that's definitely an issue. I mean, we have to look at like how do the rich invest versus how do the poor invest, right? So if you're investing in crypto, you're doing an investment, right? Um, how do the rich invest? Well, the rich diversify. I mean, that's investing 101. You don't put all your eggs in one basket, and the rich tend to be better positioned to do that because they have more money to invest, right? So it's easier to diversify when you have more money. So I think, if we look at how the poor invest, right, they put their eggs in in one basket more, they're more likely to, right? They might know less and hence are more affected by trends. Although even professionals also get that kind of trend fever, they're affected by hype. Everybody is. So yeah, I mean, but these are things that are true of any speculative investment, which is pretty much in capitalism is pretty much everything, right? I mean, anything is on the edge of becoming a speculative investment, right? I mean, in the 90s, comic books were a speculative asset, right? So, Bitcoin or whatever, crypto, Dogecoin or whatever the hell, I mean, these are just the latest iterations of highly speculative assets that, of course, are highly risky. And is there the potential for big losses to occur? Absolutely. I mean, the last big one that I'm aware of was foreign exchange trading. I get the occasional student that wants to like give a presentation in my regular econ class about why trading on foreign exchange markets is going to lead to huge profits, and I'm like, look, any trade that you do at the right time can be profitable. But the question is, what risks are you taking and what happens in the aggregate, right? I mean, to think that there's any asset class which is guaranteed to profit you is just a huge illusion that if you think that, you're about to lose a bunch of money.
Well, I think there's one of the issues with the major cryptocurrencies is just the operation of like, mining, or basically like they call that like the labor, or like the value created labor is mining for Bitcoin, which is essentially just running, like trillions of algorithms on CPUs. And like there's these shops where people who have the capital to invest in GPUs can therefore mine this cryptocurrency, largely utilizing fossil fuels to the point where like just the mining of cryptocurrency is the equivalent of like the energy uses of Argentina, like yearly. So I mean, I feel like even the structure of some of these things is aside from the very real, tangible thing of like who is actually in control of your monetary transactions, and how does that apply to like the real world today where the internet exists and we might not have to exchange hands, which could be good as far as speed. It could be good as far as public health because you're not, touching nasty things, right? So, I think it was seen as this like fantastical, magical solution to a problem, and it just created more under, the same capitalist structures. Because if Elon Musk is touting this thing, like, let's get real.
I mean, Elon Musk is a good example of investing like a rich person, though, right? I mean, like, do you think he's putting his whole fortune into Dogecoin? I don't. He's putting a small, stake relative to his total. But, I think we should. My basic perspective, until I'm proven otherwise, my basic perspective is that like cryptocurrencies is like the internet's version of cash. It's great for when you want to do an untraceable, irrevocable transaction, which sometimes you do, I mean, and by the way, for people who are revolutionaries or for people who want to do transactions, online that are maybe want them to be outside of the reach of the authorities, it's good that it exists. But, just like regular cash in the regular economy is not somehow some kind of, immediately going to change everything about capitalism, right? Its analog in the digital world is also not automatically and magically going to somehow change the reality of capitalism, but it's good that it exists and it has a place. I just think its place is a lot smaller than what most might think, or what the hype says.
I actually want to pivot to a question that someone brought up in the chat that was actually on my mind that I wanted to ask you about. There are many people who come out of the quote of new manifestation of the left who see MMT, modern monetary theory, as the kind of silver bullet to remedy the economic problems caused by the current iteration of capitalism, neoliberalism, if you will. Can you give us an explanation of MMT, modern monetary theory, what it means, what it is? Do you believe that it is a silver bullet solution, or is it really just kind of a refined version of Keynesianism? And are its promises actually kind of ridiculous in that it would require a left capture of government to implement in the first place? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I haven't talked a whole lot about MMT on Twitter because the MMT lobby is kind of like insane, and I haven't felt like tangling with them that much.
Are you afraid Stephanie Kelton's going to come get you?
I actually have corresponded with Stephanie Kelton in the past. I don't think I wouldn't count her as part. It's kind of like like Kamala Harris, and K-Hive. They don't behave the same way on. But I basically, yes, I think MMT is just another iteration of Keynesian theory. Keynes was pretty ahead of his time because in the 1920s and 1930s, he was writing the economics of fiat monetary currencies, right? Currencies that are unbacked by any commodity, and the world did not have that at the time, right? The currencies of the world were backed by commodities in the 1920s and 30s. They did experiments. They suspended convertibility at times, right? They depreciated their current value of their currencies, et cetera, right? But Keynes is pretty far-seeing in terms of theorizing a world of fiat money when that didn't actually exist. MMT just offers a few refinements onto that, but the basic idea is when the economy is below full employment, we can use monetary policy to increase investment, right, by changing interest rates. That's not a real new idea, right? I mean, that's actually that's the theory that drives every country's central bank, right? I mean, so I feel like there's a little bit of hype around the idea that MMT is some kind of revolutionary new theory. I don't think it is. It's just orthodox Keynesian perspective that is pretty widely adopted. I think what makes the MMT folks a little bit more they tend to be stronger, like when it comes to well, should we do austerity, right? Should we slash government spending and whatever? And I say no. Why would you do that? First of all, you're going to damage the economy, and secondly, there's no need for it. But I think where they're weak is to say that the dollar or whatever currency we're talking about is like the inch, and you can never run out of inches. There's a guy who goes around saying this stuff on Twitter, and I think it's indefensible. There's no parallel to that, right? I mean, it's not the case, right? I mean, the issue is, what are the consequences of producing more dollars? Like, can the United States do that? Yes, right? I mean, we have a $27 trillion total public debt. Could the Fed write a check for $27 trillion? Yes, absolutely, right? It would be a bunch of checks because a bunch of people own that debt, but you get the idea, right? Could we create the money to pay that debt? Absolutely. But would it be free of consequences? I mean, come on, of course not, right? If you dramatically expand the money supply, there's going to be consequences to that.
Yeah.
Going to reduce the value of the dollar.
I'd wonder too if it's just just a bad way of framing it, because we kind of already exist in that reality. If someone came to you and said, I guess back in 2003 and said, hey, over the next 20 years, the United States is going to invest $7 trillion into something, that could be, and then, oh, hey, fantastic, Keynesian model, this is debt spending, we're doing great things. Oh, well, that happened to be, the war on terror. So this is a model that we already exist in, where the government does debt spend to the tune of when we were in 27 trillion in the hole, so to say, oh, hey, can we spend? No, it's at this point, it's what are we spending on? And what are we not spending on?
Well, yeah, those are issues that come up whenever you talk about spending. Absolutely, right? What are the effects of that? I just think there's a kind of, I mean, and maybe I'm going to get accused of straw manning the MMT or whatever. But there's a certain view in there that says that debt doesn't matter. That money gets created by the government spending. And whatever. This is like vulgar MMT, maybe, I don't know, but that's the part that I kind of react to and say doesn't matter. I don't think that case has been established, and I don't think that Keynes would argue that either, right? I mean, that's a kind of departure from the traditional Keynesian orthodoxy, which says debt does matter, but it's a tool that we employ to manage the economy, right? I mean, we need to use debt if we're going to be doing fiscal stimulus. You don't raise taxes and then give people tax cut at the same time. They would fight against each other, right? So you have to run a deficit if you're going to do stimulus, but you have to pay it back later, right, by running a surplus in the future. And I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe the sophisticated MMT advocates would agree, but when we look at the government spending, there's a tremendous structural imbalance that never goes away, right? I mean, we spend roughly $1 trillion more than we take in good times. There's even more of a gap in bad times. So, I mean, and to say that that's never going to matter, I think is just very naive.
Well, the thing I find interesting about the MMT advocates, right, is that the whole argument is based on the fact that the U.S. dollar is a reserve currency of record, which basically means that all oil is bought in terms of dollars. So in order to get one of the most necessary commodities to function, you have to trade in dollars. What seems to elie or go by the MMT advocates is that that's based on America's position as the imperialist nation of record, that we have 800 military bases all over the world, and we can enforce our currency superiority on everyone else. Second of all, it assumes that the economic mechanisms that capitalism will use to protect itself, i.e. quantitative easing, et cetera, and so on and so forth, will be extended to expand social welfare policy for the benefit of its citizens. And I don't see how that happens unless we have massive change in the ideological superstructure in America, where the left captures government, so that we're going to get the same kind of mechanisms done to protect the exigencies of capitalism applied to actually improving the life of most people in society.
Right.
I just want to shout out. Thank you, Ryan, for the super chat. Great show. He says this is for Dr. Bair and Dr. Milton Alamati. I didn't get on it in time enough last time. My bad. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. We definitely do.
It's great to see people supporting the show. I mean, this is a great show, and we have to support left media if we want an alternative to, the right-wing propaganda that is pervasive everywhere else.
Right. I guess someone said I put a whole thesis into that sentence. It's like
that's how you speak. That is how you talk.
You didn't know Pascal speaks in thesis? That is how he talks. That's a good thing. And now he's stuck. Oh, there he's unstuck.
Yeah.
But what exactly do you think about the way in which our trade deficit with China? I just watched an interesting program with Paul Jay and Mark Blythe, and I like your thoughts on Mark Blythe. Do you find him beneficial as a political economist? Talking about how the EU, for the first time, is actually China is the premier trading partner with the EU, displacing the United States for the first time. I found that to be a very interesting fact that kind of went under the radar for everyone. And how do you see the rise of China in terms of being a kind of barrier to all of this theoretical economic posturing in terms of what we can get out of our government economically in terms of policy?
Yeah, that's a good question. China has integrated itself into the global economy, right? And that's the big change that took it from the Maoist period, where it was largely internal industrial and economic development, to, the reforms of Deng and others who took it into much more of like the realm of global trade, right? And made China useful to global capitalism in a way that it wasn't before, right? And they kind of did this grand bargain, right? And said, look, we will be your low-cost producer. We will provide you with low-wage workers, of which we have an immense number, right? And in exchange, we want to join the WTO. We want to be part of the system of international trade that the United States created in the aftermath of World War II with the Bretton Woods system, right? The U.S. created the international global order, which is why it's so funny to me that, so we have these reactionaries that are like, fear the new world order, like, fear it. What the heck? The United States created it 80 years ago. Are you kidding me? Like, we created it for our own benefit. China just said, look, we want to be part of this, but they made themselves an integral part of it since then, right? So, their socialist policies, right? I mean, they moved up the value ladder. And now it's a situation where they're basically impossible to isolate, right? I mean, when you're a major trading partner, are you really going to sanction that country? I mean, of course not. This is why it's so ludicrous that there's this movement right now to sanction China over their treatment of the Uyghurs, an issue which, by the way, is completely based on propaganda. First of all, the charges are false. Secondly, nobody's going to do it. I mean, show me the country that is going to cut China off. That's a country which is going to hurt themselves. And that means there's always a negative effect, right? Like the United States hurts itself by sanctioning Cuba, for example, right? It's just that, the wound is much less severe in an economy the size of the United States than it is on an economy the size of Cuba, right? But there's certainly, every year there's U.S. farmers that say, okay, let's end this, right? Because it's hurting us. We'd like to sell our crops in Cuba. So China's rise does present a major threat to U.S. hegemony, particularly to dollar hegemony, right? And because China knows the game, right? I mean, they like, okay, U.S. global trade is conducted in the U.S. dollar. That gives the United States tremendous advantages. It allows the United States to run a $500 billion trade deficit every year, meaning, right, the rest of the world essentially gives the United States more value than the United States provides in return. I mean, technically it's equal value, but the United States gets to give you fictitious financial assets, basically, right, in exchange for real goods, So that's a tremendous advantage to the United States. And China is, quietly, but I think increasingly openly, trying to engineer a new system, but recognizing that they don't have the same kind of clout, right, that the United States had in the wake of World War II. It's a much more delicate situation, but I think that's where it's headed. It's hard to say what's exactly going to happen, but China is already inking these deals to move away from the dollar.
And I think it's interesting too when you mentioned that you do judo, but that's kind of like essentially what China was doing was like using the dominant strength and capitalism, to exploit a weakness.
Please.
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
And this is why it's so crazy when we hear this charge, like from Trump or whatever, the Trump Republicans, that China has somehow abused the system. Like, abuse the system, right? China worked within the system that the United States created,
Yes.
Like it's
and
like
also,
we follow the rules, dude,
and like the thing that's like they're like, it's like, no, they're not playing fair.
Yeah.
They're like, they have a centralized planned government. That's not fair. You can't do that. Well, it's like, well, what would people do that, see other countries as a threat, but they can actually have, the same people sit in the same rooms, plan out the next 20 years of, one of the largest populations on earth with a huge amount of resources, and say, how do we win? It's not about winning right now in the next 4 years, election to election. It's how do we, and however many poor people that, are, subjugated, just making tons and tons of American flags, at the end, this long-term game that China's playing, they're winning, and literally all they have to say is like, they're not playing fair.
I think the metaphor of American flags that are made in China and, like that, they sort of contribute to like, I mean, of course it's a very minor part of what China does, but I think it's a great like little image, to say that like China's getting ahead with these manufactured goods, including this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to address something you were talking about, the move to de-dollarization that China poses as a threat to the United States. People have been talking about de-dollarization now for a decade. The Russians have been talking about it. Even the French have been talking about it, moving away from the dollar standard. But how does that become really possible when we still have this SWIFT economic system in which all trade with interwoven economic trade between countries is still based on the standard economic model that comes out of the United States, which is the SWIFT model? How does exactly that get bypassed when we're talking about the potential de-dollarization?
Yeah, I mean, that's why you need a new system, or I mean, these trade deals that create regional blocks are a step in that direction. But it's true that the United States controls a lot of the levers that regulate international trade, and so, I mean, that is what it is. I think that the question is when or what things would happen that would make it impossible to continue to hold that control.
Well,
And I mean,
speaking of international trade, I want to thank Sean Moon for the $20 huge super chat. The 70s inflection point between Keynesian and neoliberalism was supposedly driven by inflation. Are we on the verge of hyperinflation? Velocity and quantity of money. How can the American left respond to this?
yeah, that's a good question. I think, are we on the verge of that? Right now, the economic situation is we're barely emerging from a recession, right? So a recession tends to have deflationary pressures, which have been offset by a lot of money creation. So we're not seeing very strong deflation. We didn't see that in the Great Recession either, right? Like this last big recession that began in 2008. Didn't have, it had basically flat prices. It had a few months in there of maybe negative 0.1%, whatever, right? Very slight contraction. Classically, right, what should happen? I mean, if we use the neoclassical model of how do economies adjust to recession, what should happen is there should be pretty broad deflation. Prices should fall, which then stimulates demand, which then brings the economy to its full employment equilibrium, right? But of course, modern economies have all sorts of things which get in the way of that, right? So, that's the critique of Keynes, to say, look, that doesn't really work. And so instead of putting our faith in deflation, we should put our faith in increasing aggregate demand, right, through government regulation. So, we do that to a certain extent, right? But what kinds of things would cause hyperinflation? I mean, massive money creation is supposed to do that, right? And we are doing fairly massive money creation. Are we seeing hyperinflation? Not in consumer prices, right? But there is one place that we're seeing much more rapid growth than any economic fundamentals justify, and that is in financial markets, right? I mean, the Dow hitting 30,000 and showing no signs of slowing down while the economy struggles and loses tens of millions of jobs. I mean, that's hard to explain other than by saying it's just simply asset inflation, right? And both of these things are connected, right? Because when the dollar is the reserve currency, then money is going to be funneled into U.S. financial markets. There's going to be demand for financial assets, including bonds, including stocks, including basically every financial asset. There's going to be demand for it, right? Because this is how the trade accounts balance on paper, right? For if there's a trade surplus in goods, it has to be balanced by an equal size flow of value in financial terms, right? So, the trade accounts are always nominally balanced, right? When I say there's a $500 billion trade deficit, that means in goods. It's balanced in financial terms. And so all of that demand flowing into financial markets, of course, it tends to boost the value of those assets, right? So what does that mean in terms of, the things that the average person sees are, consumer prices, right? And the filtering effect, like how we get from inflation of financial assets to the consumer prices, gas, food, stuff like that, that affects our lives. That transmission process is very complex and uneven, like it's so, I mean, this is a long way of saying, I don't know, right? I mean, and I don't think anybody really knows what, but we certainly seem to be doing things which are historically have destroyed the currencies of the past, right? When there's massive debts and borrowing in order to stem the flow, typically that's what destroys the value of a currency. I mean, if we go by every other historical instance.
You have a very gentle way of describing some very scary news. So I appreciate that. It's a very nice way of saying that we're fucked. It kind of seems like what you just kind of delivered here.
Pascal.
Well, I mean, on a level of global empire, I think the U.S. global empire is fucked. Yeah. I don't think that means you and I. I mean, how much do we benefit from this current global empire?
Yeah, true. Very true.
I mean, somewhat. There's some benefit, like absolutely, right? Like if you want to travel to some other country and you don't want to be fucked with, being an American citizen is better than being a citizen of, let's say, Panama or something, right? I mean, so there's certainly benefits to the average person to imperialism, but most of it goes to the very rich, right? And is soaked in blood, So it would be good for the world when the American empire crumbles.
I just wanted the question that was asked about the 70s. I'm reading a pretty interesting book. Some may be familiar with it. The Pivotal Decade by Judith Stein, How the United States Traded Factories for Finance in the 70s. It's a really good indication about how the neoliberal turn really begins in the 70s. Judith Stein, a great historian, she passed away, but this book was written in 2010. Folks should check it out. I'm in the early stages, but it's really an interesting piece of work. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and friend of the show, Gene Bajalan, brought it up, is the fascination and fetishization of the New Deal that we see in the contemporary left. One of the reasons why I think that this fetishization is misplaced, besides the fact that the New Deal comes about as a result of a massive push by socialists and communists in the 30s and 40s that forces those concessions, which we don't have now, is that the New Deal was based on an economic reality in which post-World War II, the United States was the foreign trade hegemon in the world without any real global competition. And one of the main reasons why we went off the Bretton Woods system is that with the rise of Japan and Germany, the United States could not sustain economic competition with those forces, and we had to move to fiat currency and eventually into neoliberalism. How are people fetishizing the New Deal as a solution for the current manifestation of American capitalism called neoliberalism when those kind of geopolitical realities do not exist and will not exist when we have countries, particularly like China and others, who are massive international trade partners?
Yeah, I think people are into the New Deal because it represents a moment of possibility where, we could seemingly do just a few things and, there's no revolution or whatever, right? It's legislative, and yet create new programs which improve people's lives. And, I think it's unquestionable that the New Deal improved people's lives, right? It's better to have a social security system than not to have one, right? It's better to have, the Medicare and Medicaid actually came later out of this, right? These are products of Johnson's Great Society, but it's, I don't know, it's part of that same kind of thrust, right? It's better to have those programs than not have them in terms of, we look at the impact on the ordinary people's lives. But I think you're right in saying that these don't take place in a vacuum, right? They take place in an environment where, well, first of all, U.S. capitalism is facing a huge sustained crisis of the 1930s. And there's a very well organized and very strong left, particularly in terms of trade unions, right? I mean, the trade unions in the 1930s, much stronger and much more militant than anything we see today. And, I think what we see is basically like social democratic reforms only happen when capitalism is on the edge of a revolution. And some far-seeing capitalist basically says, we need these reforms, otherwise the game is up. FDR is not a leftist, right? FDR is a very wealthy person himself, right? He just is far-seeing enough to say, if we don't do some reforms, then, it's going to be game over, and that's going to be bad for the entire bourgeois class. So I think that is a problematic era to kind of put your entire strategy behind. And also, I think we've seen that these reforms are quite easy to undo over time, right? I mean, like, if Social Security is your only source of income as a retiree, you're not going to live a decent life. I mean, I'm just going to say that to you point blank, right? It's not enough income, and that represents a weakening of that entire system, right? If it's not enough income to actually support you in a retirement, then what the hell are we doing here, right? I mean,
I'm actually to double down on that with you. I'm actually working on a video essay thing for Zero Books, where I wrote a piece about my view of nomad land, and actually in the book, a real woman talks about how living on her, I think it was $500 a month or something like that, she was getting on Social Security, wasn't enough, and she was contemplating suicide. And she was one of the people that lived in her RV, I think it was. Like, she's a real woman that really lives in an RV that was used for the movie. That's a different conversation. But, to your point, like this is a reality for so many of our elderly, to the point where Amazon literally has an itinerant elderly workforce that they use. And when conditions are bad in the warmer warehouses, they have ambulances outside for the people that pass out with heat stroke.
Yeah.
So, just adding.
Yeah, I mean, this. I think. I don't know. I see it as a marketing strategy, because that's like, there's not many times that people can at least identify with the basic, level of American education that, people get, at least of American history. There's not many times that you could turn to, like, what is America not the obvious, like, bad thing, and, like, actually point to something towards hope, and also be on the left. And so it's kind of something like where I don't know if people who are engaging in electoral politics and are, consider themselves leftist, I'm not sure there's many times or instances in the United States that you could actually use to identify, to actually, propagandize people, market your selling points without the Green New Deal, or without the New Deal, excuse me, FDR and all those things, because people's political education of, like, Eugene Debs, for instance, or Senator Huey Long, like, people don't know who these people are, so what, like, it's kind of like,
are you saying that the political imagination on those on the left is limited to something like the New Deal because of a lack of political education of the history of the left, Marcus?
I'd say it more of like the audience, if they're trying to sell something, speaking in the terms of your audience. And I think, it's maybe just a lack. It could be a lack of vision. It would be a lack of, great expectations on the audience, instead of relying on the New Deal and FDR over and over again. Why don't we start introducing people to who, Eugene Debs is, or start introducing people to, just other actual leftists that were, put in electoral politics as socialists, instead of just going like, hey, we could do the New Deal again.
I think there's a kind of there's a difficulty too, where it's like, you're on the left, but you want to be sort of practical. You don't want to be like unpopular or whatever. And so you say, like, all right, we can I mean, this is where reformism comes from, right? It says, okay, with just a few changes, we can make the system a lot better. And we're not crazy. We're not calling for something like revolution. But I mean, that's not my personal position, right? My position is we're not going to get any of these things without at least the very clear threat of a revolution, right? That it has to be pretty credible, And so if that's what it takes to get even reforms, to get even close to reforms that are going to improve people's lives, well, we better get started, right? And by the way, that's the second best, right? I mean, I think the best would be, rather than begging for crumbs from the table, just be like, look, we own this table, I mean, like, stop giving us crumbs, period, right? Let's just restructure society so that it works for everybody instead of for a handful of very rich people. But there's difficulties with that too, right? Because if you advocate for revolution is inherently uncertain. It's inherently chaotic. It's inherently going to involve conflict, And then these things, it looks like, oh, you're being impractical and da, right? We have a conflict right now. It's just that it's being waged against the poor, And to think that that's fine and that's acceptable, I don't agree,
Well, I had a conversation with a gentleman from the new Northern Independence Party that had sprouted up in the UK, trying to fill a void where Labour is in, like, obviously not in Scotland. They don't have the SNP, but part of it is this idea that, hey, the South London, they do not care about the North. They've largely left the people unattended to, and whatever. They just come up with come up here, have a pint, fish and chips, don't actually help. But they actually have used the American Revolution as one of their selling points, of just the fact that, no, we can do this. This is not something that's out of the realm, like this happened to quote unquote us. And I don't know, I just kind of thought that was a very interesting way. And and also too, this type of stuff is like, yeah, when you're making a sell, it's maybe not truth, but truthiness is something that you go for to make it, widespread and stuff like that. But
I wanted to move to another question in terms of potential political possibility. We had Vijay Prashad on the show a couple of days ago, and we were talking about how the Western world seems to be stuck in this dialectic between reactionary nationalism, Trump, Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, and neoliberalism, and how neoliberalism may not be maintain the economic prospects long term. So the only other option is democratic socialism, or some people believe soc dems. And the question that I say, and I've been saying this not to be the Debbie Downer, is that I think the energy is with the reactionary right. I think that in America, we're seeing a Weimar moment right now. And my question is that what exactly is the capacity to provide an alternative to reactionary nationalism, which, by the way, does have a critique of capitalism? If you read even the platform of some of these reactionaries, they talk about how crony capitalism has sold them out. Some of them even ask for Keynesian types of policy agendas. What exactly happens when the neoliberal party of the Democrats isn't even as progressive in vision as reactionary nationalists? And we know even fascists use, state capitalism or soc dem rhetoric to explain their popularity. So how exactly do we get out of the dialectic that we're stuck in between neoliberalism and reactionary nationalism, or at best soc demism and reactionary nationalism, when I believe that, frankly, both of those left flanks are too weak to the reactionary right, where I fundamentally believe the energy is politically?
I wonder if that's true, though. I mean, there's a lot of cultural juice on the reactionary right, certainly, right? We have these well-known reactionary figures, reactionary media figures, but there were 8 million people who took this to the streets last year, right? I mean, the reactionary right has not done that. They haven't done anything close to that, okay, there's reactionary capital uprising. Yeah, but it involves what, 1,000 people or something. I mean, it's small. The Black Lives Matter movement is many times larger than anything that the reactionary right did. So I'm not convinced. You're right to say that there's definitely juice behind the reactionary right, absolutely. But I don't know that it's much greater. And I don't think that the ideas which support it, I mean, clearly they have a long history, all right? White supremacy is like, it's like the US religion, So there's a long history there, right? But I think that a lot of it has been discredited to the point where you can't even openly say these terms. And that's a victory of the left, right? It's a victory of the left that you cannot go around, using the N-word or whatever, right? I mean, it's forced even the most reactionary people to adopt leftist rhetoric, basically, right?
Yeah, but
So I think that's some kind of positive.
I don't think that the posturing of liberal anti-racism that I think is endemic in Black Lives Matter, excluding the street rebellions, is going to be the answer for this fundamental crisis of capitalism we're seeing. And I think in many ways it facilitates a blowback from the right as opposed to addressing the ideological challenge they posed.
Yeah, it's definitely a blowback moment, no question. But I think that, I mean, that's why I like the term reactionary, right? Because these are people who are reacting to things. They're not moving forward, right? They are trying to stop and slow down, progress, right? So I think that that's actually a pretty weak ideology overall. But you need something strong, right? You need something that you need to be able to say, listen, this is where we should go, right? I mean, that's how you gain political support. Not by, I mean, yeah, you need to criticize your opponents, but that can't be all that you're doing, And if we listen to the reactionaries, they do have a critique of capitalism to some extent, just like the Nazis did, big corporations and they twist it into racist and xenophobic ways, of course. But there's a critique of capitalism. If you don't have a stronger, more logical, better critique, then you lose to that, absolutely, right? And that's a risk. But you need not just a critique, but you need, here's how we can and should organize our economy, right? I don't think that the right has that. I don't see that anywhere. Do they have it? It's a sort of stylized, like, utopian version of capitalism or something, which has basically never worked in its entire history. We do need to be clear about, here is what we should do. Here's what society could look like. And I think that is a strong antidote to right-wing populism.
We have a super chat here. Someone's asking, am I wrong to believe ineffectual and feckless Biden policies are deliberately, emphasis added, designed to install the next Trump? I don't know about deliberately, but I think it's possible that it will lead to that.
Yeah, I think, we'd all say that it's exactly going to lead to that. There's no other thing it would lead to but the next Trump, or maybe Trump himself. But
well, if you're a Star Wars
I don't know about
fan,
deliberately.
If you're a Star Wars fan, then my take is that Biden was actually the Emperor Palpatine all along, and Trump was just Grievous.
Oh, Jesus. I don't even know what this means.
I don't know how closely the parties operate together. I don't know how much intentionality or deliberation there is. I mean, I think the Democrats have a contradiction with regard to holding power, which is that they are going to have to do some unpopular things, right? The neoliberal regime is brutal. I mean, and so whoever administers it is going to be unpopular, So there's always a backswing, because the other party then is able to criticize the ones in power and say, hey, if you go with us, it's going to be much better, and da-da-da, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't
like holding power either. They don't like getting that kind of flack. I mean, Trump and the Republicans got an absolutely immense amount of flack, which I think they are happier to not have. They like to just advance the neoliberal agenda quietly and do their trolling, right? And the Democrats, they have their own style of that, right? But they basically, they like being out of power to some extent, So I think you could make the case that says they don't try as hard as they really could to, stay in power.
I kind of think that's like a product of even like the two-party system in a way, like regardless of any type of like cultural or societal influences, if you just have two political powers, just being opposition, regardless of whatever it is politics into and of itself. So the fact that like, yeah, when someone is up on stage and you're just in the shadows launching tomatoes at them, well, it's a little hard to perform in that manner. And in a way, to your base, it's just politics in and of itself. You don't actually have to sing or dance. But, outside of that, now you're just looking into like when the Republicans are just obviously better at it. And because, the Democrats, I don't think, whether they do it deliberately or they just paid opposition, I don't know. I just like, you just see what it is, where their adherence to decorum is like always usually their political failure, because they can't ever like just speak the truth about their political opponents. They're always like the friends across the aisle.
Someone's talking about the threat of Kamala Harris being our last line of defense against the next Republican nightmare. Yeah, that's pretty scary.
Actually, I was wondering when I was watching Keisha Lance Bottoms drop out of the mayoral race. I was thinking, like, is this going to be something where it's going to be the launching pad to join up with Kamala? I don't know.
You think it might be a scandal that took her?
I don't know.
I don't know. I think Marcus has an interesting point about, is this her way of getting ready to get into another position in the potential Harris administration and have the sassiest yes queen presidential run we've ever seen.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, if that was the speech to launch her, it was a pretty bad showing, I think. But that's something that I think Georgia politics probably did. I gotta assume that just being in that state, it just sucks, regardless of your politics. Being a part of the elite's not going to save her when, she's in that Georgia state apparatus.
Interesting. So Dr. Bair, what exactly do you see prospects of a left at this particular moment? I mean, we don't really focus on electoralism at This Is Revolution because we feel that there are other left media spaces that are fetishizing, talking about, is the squad for us or not, et cetera, so on and so forth. And we tend to find that really lacking in intellectual imagination. But the question does become, right, is that, number one, I've always argued that we have leftists when we don't have a left. And even if we don't want to use the term left, how exactly do we create an oppositional force to the current crisis of capital and political intransigence by the Democratic Party, the potential rise of reactionary nationalism, and at the same time actually have a project? Like, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who I think is kind of flirting with post-leftism ideologically, if you will. And he was always, whining about, the left is this, they can't do that, they don't want to govern, they don't want to build anything. And I agreed with some of his arguments. I thought some of them were hyperbolic, but what exactly is the vision for a project, for a new society, for rational governance of the current reality that we can offer that can be clearly messaged to appeal to American society? I don't think we've been effectively able to do that, definitely not in the 50-year counter-revolution period, but not even in the last decade where we see this kind of burgeoning left development. And how exactly can that be done?
Well, those are big questions. I'll start by saying I have no idea. I mean, I don't know the exact answer because these are unpredictable things. I mean, I think if you had said in 2019 that millions of people would take the streets over police brutality, people would be like, "What?" I mean, this is a very unpredictable event. So I don't think that we can see it coming well enough to say. What I see things that I'll just say things that I see as hopeful, right? I see it as hopeful that you have a new generation of people who are not convinced by the Cold War propaganda, the anti-socialist, anti-communist propaganda. That is much weaker than it's been, I think, at any point since the 1940s. That's promising. At the same time, we have a left media environment, which is, again, much stronger, I think, than what we've seen. I mean, we have a video basis, just for example, right? All of the left media in the past was text-based, right? Which is good, I mean, there's a lot of newspapers and whatever, small organizations putting out. This is good, but we're at a whole different level just in terms of having an alternative media environment. And, that's partly why I think shows like this are important. And there's lots of them. There's a kind of flourishing of that. And I think that people are seeing very clearly that capitalism is a brutal system, right? So capitalism creates its own gravediggers, right? I mean, that's the famous line from Marx. So capitalism is itself the greatest radicalizing force. The role of the left is to hold the critique of capitalism together, right? To create that space where we can imagine a better world, right? And you need good thinkers to persuasively do that, right? And then it's a matter of what is the issue that crystallizes? What is the issue that coheres around, right? I think that's inherently unpredictable, but we're going to be better off if we have that kind of infrastructure, right? People who are out there organizing. What should they be organizing about? I don't know exactly, right? I think that there's some room for each individual to say, well, here's an issue that I can work on, I care about, is going to make people's lives better, and is going to be connected to an overarching kind of, vision of how to not just reform one piece of this whole system, but move towards a better one. So, I mean, those are areas of hope that I see.
We got a big super chat here. Hi, Big Show. Should we still see the Democrats as neoliberal when they're returning to emergency welfare capitalism? If you disagree, is every politician in office inherently neoliberal? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I think neoliberalism is definitely the ground upon which we stand. I don't think we've seen an articulation. Because so if we're going to do the welfare state, you need to have an ideological articulation that supports that, right? And I think that articulation is basically pretty weak. We haven't seen a contemporary version of that has become hegemonic, right? I mean, obviously there is a discourse behind welfare capitalism, no question. It's just how strong is it? How much does it influence the contemporary discourse? Which has mostly been around the idea that government is bad, and we should get rid of it. So I think neoliberal is still the kind of default setting. And we have people that want to tinker with it a little bit. Are they still they're still operating basically in a neoliberal frame? Although they're challenging it, right? I mean, the Green New Deal, let's say, right? This challenges a little bit, right? Or the idea that we should dramatically raise the minimum wage, make college free, right? All parts of Bernie's platform. These things challenge the neoliberal agenda, but I think the neoliberal agenda is still pretty strong. That's my assessment.
I think too that at the end of the day, this is one of the issues when just political science terms bleed out into just normal days, because shouting down neoliberals is something that happens in shit posts, political left Twitter, and not understanding that there was a once liberal political order. There was and then like a somewhat resurgence of that in a different model to be neoliberal political order, and what that goes into all those things. Now it's just like, oh, what do you call someone that likes Democrats? Oh, they're a neolib. Screw off, So I don't know. I feel like this thing, even the term, just kind of just it gets used as a pejorative for Democrats in a lot of people's sense.
There is a debate as to the utility of the term neoliberalism. For me, I look at it as a particular moment in American history when a bipartisan economic paradigm was chosen that gutted government functionality in favor of financialization and private sector control of government resources, which was continuous, I think, starting with Nixon, going from Carter, Reagan, on from Clinton to Obama, and now we're faced with Biden, who governed during that time. So I understand in terms of the frustration, because I think the average quote unquote normie doesn't know what neoliberal means at all. But I haven't thought of a better shorthand to explain exactly what this particular manifestation of capitalism is, to explain to them what happened and what's going on and why they're working longer hours and seem to be having less and less money and able to buy less and less.
Yeah, I think it's good to point out too that Trump kind of represented a possible juncture or fracture in the neoliberal consensus, because Trump, I mean, the first time a major politician, certainly a U.S. president, talked about protectionism as an economic strategy, I mean, that's pretty much the opposite of the world order that the United States created during Bretton Woods, right? This is an era of free trade, right? The whole point of the WTO was to lower tariffs, which it did. It was very successful in that, right? So the entire world is far more neoliberal than it was 60 years ago, right? So to have a major politician say, oh, that was a mistake, that's not working for the United States, let's move back into protectionism, which, let's be honest, right? That was the regime of the 1920s, 1930s. This is the era of countries messing with each other and doing economic warfare, having differential tariffs, using tariffs as a tool of politics, and saying, France, we like what you're doing, low tariffs. Germany, fuck you, high tariffs, right? So to have just unified tariffs, I mean, this is the neoliberal agenda, right? Because you're setting a lower bar for trade. We want more trade, right? That's neoliberalism. So, there was a juncture, right? If Trump had been a stronger leader, if Trump was better at articulating his position, he's not, right? I mean, Trump's in reality a very weak leader. He was not good at articulating the protectionist position. And so he was not able to establish that as an idea. All he could do is kind of create a cult of personality around himself, right? Which he was successful at, let's admit that, So I don't even think Trump challenged neoliberalism. Trump was seen as an aberration. And so now the system has restored itself. You would need a much different thing to happen. Maybe one of these Trump successor types could articulate, a protectionist or non-neoliberal position. But it would be a big change from, U.S. discourse.
You don't think Reagan flirted with protectionism dealing with the Japanese?
That was another moment of, where that discourse could have taken hold, because Japan did successfully navigate that system, in a different way than China did, right? But they're one of the few that has managed to become wealthy by following this system. There aren't that many countries that have actually successfully been able to, enter the sort of top rank, right?
I wonder if. Oh, okay, sorry. I wonder if some of the things that Biden is doing isn't actually, like we even talked about, feeding into the follow-on of Trump, to like whatever reactionary right to actually have more power, because on May Day he made that official loyalty day. The first in that, and talking like, especially in reference to China, this buy America, we need to, and it's basically just make America great again, with 3 Bs, build back better, but buy USA, all this type of stuff. and yeah, it's like, I think it feeds into just like this ratchet effect with the Overton window. So I don't know if y'all would even like see that, agree, that yeah, it's kind of just feeding into the next step with
I see Biden as no deviation from Trump's posture on China, and I see him as no deviation in terms of maybe to degree on the American first posturing based on that speech, kind of like the buy. When was the last time we heard "Buy America"? I mean, maybe what the war, the 9/11. I mean, only
yeah, freedom fries, freedom toast.
Yeah, because it does run counter to the kind of agenda, right? I mean, Buy American is a basically anti-neoliberal statement. And so it's, how do you square that, right? Like we either believe in free markets or we don't, right? I mean, you would have to create a new kind of discourse, and that discourse would have to somehow become hegemonic, right? We just don't see that right now.
Super chat question. Did high inflation in the 70s force the country into neoliberal policies, or was high inflation part of the attack on unions and Keynesian economics? Are you familiar with the Powell Memo? Very familiar with the Powell Memo. I think neoliberalism was a bipartisan consensus that actually was a reaction to global economic competition from Germany, Japan, also the London gold crisis, in which you had London and France trying to move against American gold dollar-backed hegemony, and the weaker positioning of the United States as a trading partner forced that as a kind of economic reaction. But Dr. Bair is the economist. Maybe he may disagree. I'd like to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I think that first of all, it's good to recognize that the high inflation of the 70s was a product of the end of the first Bretton Woods system, right? In 1971, this is that moment where Nixon goes off the gold standard. And, there was this moment where everyone was like, what's going to happen, right? I mean, and some were like, it's the dollar that's propping up gold, so, but that was shown to not be really true, right? Because if that were true, then the price of gold in dollars should decline, right? Once you sever that relationship. But of course, the opposite thing happened, right? The price of gold in dollars went crazy, went through the roof, right? Because everyone was asking the question, what does it mean for the world to be on a truly global fiat monetary order for the first time in history, And high inflation is a product of that question, right? It's a product of the question, what gives money its value? How does the regime of international trade work? Oil prices went up dramatically along with gold. And this is what caused consumer prices to rise. Interest rates were then pushed up, right, in order to sort of deal with this problem, to try to mop up the excess liquidity in Fed speak. But this is the context of high inflation. And did it weaken the Keynesian consensus at the time? Yes, absolutely, right? Because Keynesian economics never had a very good answer to inflation, because Keynesian economics came out of the 1930s when inflation was not the primary concern. The primary concern was dealing with the worst capitalist crisis that had been seen up to that point. And the big thrust of Keynesian economics is economic stimulus, and to a secondary extent, management of the economy, right, throughout the business cycle, to smooth out, to regulate, to make the business cycle less volatile. So inflation, having inflation be high is certainly a threat to the Keynesian consensus. It led to the neoliberal revolution, which they said, look, regulating capitalism does not produce the best kind of capitalism. Free markets does. And, that's Friedman and many others, right? The neoclassical counter-revolution, it took them 50 years or so to develop a good counter-critique of Keynes, but they did that. And then that became, they managed to kind of wrest the dominance from the Keynesians. Does that, these are just two varieties of pro-capitalism, though, right? I mean, to say capitalism works best when it has free markets versus to say, oh, no, it works better with some government regulation. I mean, imagine if you were talking about slavery rather than capitalism. Imagine if one side said, "Oh, slavery works best when it has free markets," and the other side said, "Oh no, we need to regulate it." I mean, you'd be like, "What the hell is this?" You know,
Yeah.
like this is an immoral system. You can't regulate it and make it good. You know,
at the end of the day, you're just extending the boardroom, you know, to the legislative body of whatever country it's existing in. You know, either the companies get to do whatever they want, or they have to hire a few more people, i.e., politicians, to do whatever they want. You know, because like at the end of the day, if you're based off capitalism, it's going to benefit capital and bend towards that, no matter what you know, restrictions you put on it. Which is that what we see, right? Even like with some of these major legislation and policies, it's more of just a not even like a true reset. You know, it's kind of just like a quick reshuffle. You know, let's just make this not as terrible for a moment or two, and then continue on and let, you know, capital do it as may. Still holding on to the hoard, right? That's like one of the things too, is like there's not been like a real huge take back of capital to actually, you know, amount a reset. There's just been, oh, we're just going to make the rules a little less brutal, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we've had Dr. Bair here for 2 hours. So I didn't tell him how long we were going to try to get him for. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We totally internet kidnapped him for like 2 hours.
I've been sending out distress signals this whole time, and no one survived to rescue me from it.
But people like it.
Political economy.
People like it when you come on the show. I love it when you come on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I always enjoy it. Yeah.
I'm shocked you're not on more shows, because I think you lay this stuff out in such a simple way that makes it easy for people to understand and digest. And once you understand and digest it, then it makes you angry. It makes you want to learn more, and it makes you want to do more, I think. So I appreciate you, and I thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, well,
it's a great episode. We covered a lot of political economy.
We did. I mean, there's more to say about all these things, but you know, I think it's a good. We've done a lot.
And also, you guys, Dr. Bair writes books. He's not just as Marcus says, shit poster.
I was just saying he does a great job of it. It's like it's a yes and type of thing.
So if you subscribe to his YouTube channel, I've been putting up. I'll put it up again while I'm talking, so you guys know that I'm not being a dick. You can support Dr. Bair on Patreon. He actually has not just meditation lessons, but he also puts his literal lesson plans out there. And I think right now you have up your history on the Soviet Union. You have a brief history on China. So if you want sort of education, if you're just getting into the idea of socialism and Marxism, and if you're getting into it and you're all fired up about it, and then your right-wing buddy or your fucking Dem buddy says, but what about Russia and the tanks and all that shit, Dr. Bair is a good resource to give you a good understanding of what happened in the Soviet Union.
Thank you. I should also say, you know, I teach this course, which is an introduction to political economy. This is a regular college course. It's offered through Riverside City College, where I teach. And so, you know, there's a summer version of that. If anybody is interested in that, actually getting, you know, 3 college credits at a pretty low rate, you can go to rcc.edu and take that class. You know, it's an internet-based class, but it, you know, it transfers to whatever else. Of course, if you just want to check out the YouTube channel, all my lectures are up there. And you can.
I might fuck around and take that class because I want to be Bair certified.
If I'm Bair certified,
then my shit talk's gonna be on a whole nother level.
Okay, all right.
I'm Bair certified, man. I'm not even trying to hear you right.
Bair certified.
But thank you, Dr. Bair. Have a good rest of your day. It's still early.
All right. Take care, guys.
Peace. That is Dr. Asatar Bair. You can find him on Twitter at Dr. Asatar Bair. I had a link to his Patreon. He definitely has a youtube.com/Asatar Bair, and that'll take you to his lessons. He actually has a book that he wrote about the prison system and slavery. The first time he was on my show last year, when it was just an audio-only podcast, we actually talked about his book that he wrote quite a few years ago. There's also video breaks down the book as well. Anything you want to say, Marcus?
No, it was dope. This is something that, I keep saying, and I'm gonna keep harping it. People in academia that have learned how to still speak in normal people talk and are able to just deliver messages in a way that people can understand, which you assume a lot of professors can do that, but that doesn't always happen. And it's always great to see I just love interacting with people who are so much smarter than me, but I can still have a conversation with.
I do like hanging out with Asatar Bair. He's a good dude, man. He's actually a really good dude, and we got to get him off Twitter a little bit. He caps back at those people that get on Tankies and then talk shit about him, and they end up sending. It really did send a fucking email to his boss, try to get him fired.
Yeah, well, don't try and silence the man. Don't take away his First Amendment rights to tweet on Twitter.com. It's not okay.
Don't take away his right to tweet. Someone said in the chat, Pascal, you have to get back to writing your book.
It's not going to happen while we still keeping this 2-hour podcast on right now.
And that's why your screen froze.
God damn. Fogged up my glasses with that one.
So ice cold. Was like, so ice cold, the screen froze.
Woo.
Well, you had Tuesday off. You were supposed to just... Tuesday was off for you.
Not Thursday and not today.
Thursday was not off. Thursday was a very intense Thursday. I think Thursday was more intense than I was even ready for.
What was Thursday?
Thursday was Milton Alamati, and we had a talk about Africa, and the kind of the basis of it was just going to be, well, Africa's up for grabs, right? Again, it's 1890 all over again with Africa when it comes to China and Russia, divvying it up, if you will. And Milton Alamati gave us a very good, nuanced take on what's going on in the continent as a whole. And we definitely want to bring him back on to break down maybe individual countries next time.
Because I caught both of y'all on the Nomiki Khan's show.
We were on the Nomiki show recently, which was a good time. I didn't know what to expect. I'll be honest with you. I was a tad nervous. I didn't know. That's why I shaved. I didn't know what to do, so I shaved.
I was wondering.
I was running around before the show, like, what do I wear? What do I wear? And I was like, just get pants.
Is this Captain Jason Sparrow? I saw it. I was like, is this dude?
So yeah, totally shave. It was one of our big moments. I'm going to be on Ben Burgess' show Monday with professor and friend of show, friend in real life, Teray Reed and Sam Cedar.
That's gonna be a good one. Well, I got to catch up with the Thursday one then. But no, I thought it was a good interview. The thing, I guess, my only thing that I wish Nomi would do is just actually the guest that she has on the first half. I wish they'd kind of roll into the panel, That's like one thing that's like, yeah. But no, I thought it was a good interview. I thought y'all did great. No, that's all I got to say. That's good shit.
at one point, I think this is funny. At one point, my Wi-Fi dropped out, so I was gone, and Pascal was mildly choppy, so I think he wasn't hearing her. So I was like, Pascal, like now. And so my Wi-Fi went out. I was like, oh no, he's just gonna be quiet.
Oh, man, we need to get
y'all reconnected to the show. He's just like, blah, 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 blah. And they cut a clip of him and they shared it, and a bunch of people reshared.
So is it all right? Like, is it 50 feet? How much do you need? How much Ethernet cable do y'all need? 60 feet? Where's the router at? Have you thought about it? 100 feet. Can we get another super chat for a 200-foot Ethernet cable, please?
We're talking right now about trying to, if it is possible to get a separate connection in the room, because in the daytime, she has meetings that she's in constantly and work that she has to do constantly. So it just, one of us gets connected, and for some reason it's me. So I think she's actually sitting there going,
Dr. Marlon Barber. Actually, this is whatever university, they've got miles of Ethernet cord. Let's hook it up. Let's start doing some mutual aid. You see, it's going out right now. We need it.
Hey, I do want to say this. The money that we get, first of all, thank you so much for support, because the support really does back into the show. Pascal literally bought a booster for his Wi-Fi so he could have a better connection. And in all fairness, when he was on the Nomiki show, he goes, "Hey man, I realized that thing wasn't even on." But
it was pretty good. It went pretty good.
Everything goes back into the infrastructure. There's a reason why the videos are getting a little bit better. I spent a little money on some software. So we're trying to increase the production value, so the show is more enjoyable. Wired is the way to go. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Todd. I'm just gonna shut up and say thank you, Todd.
And also, do you have a someone Hero Art saying they don't know how to do a super chat? So now we need some of that political education to get in that money. How do we super chat?
We have. Oh man, you guys are
hype train.
Mike Rose childcare.
Wait a minute.
Oh my god.
So I'm gonna close the door on this one because I don't want to get kicked out again. But yeah, so since she has to leave with the boy whenever the show happens, man. So yeah, I gotta get somebody that I can get. Hey, can you watch the kid? It's like $20.
Yeah, there it is.
Here, like, hey, here's $20, here's $30. Can you watch the kid? Because
well, thank you.
You guys can't see the looks that I get sometimes.
Charles, making it rain tree. We appreciate the support. We need.
Oh shit! But yeah, there's some new. And then when the whole computer broke, all my stuff was so old that it doesn't work on this new computer. So that,
man, that seems like it's not even like you're gonna be able to buy enough shit. It's, we just got to make it and hire some nerds.
I enjoy learning how to do this stuff. And I think it makes the show better when we're figuring out how to make it work to make our content better, opposed to someone that has an approach to do things. This is going to be, I'm going to use the formula that I use on this thing. I'm just going to put it here. So I like what we do. I'm excited to see Pascal is getting some upgrades coming his way soon too. So I'm excited. Like, be excited for the good things that are happening with the show. just created a new intro for the show that we do every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time with Marcus on the Left Flank Vets Twitch channel.
Pascal, yeah, we got to talk about a time shift.
All right, told him.
Oh, okay. Good. 2 every Tuesday.
2 p.m. every Tuesday on the Left Flank Vets Twitch channel, which, if you don't know about it, it's right here. Follow the Left Flank Vets on Twitch. Bam.
And on that note,
and on that note, fellas, thank you guys so much. Thank you once again to Dr. Asatar Bair. And we are out. Hey.